Hello and welcome to Season 6, Episode 21 of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I'm your host, Christina Hagen, coming to you live from Cape Town. We aim to keep these webinars free for everyone to learn from and enjoy. So if you do enjoy the series and can contribute, no matter how small an amount, please do consider donating. All the funds that are donated go towards the running costs of the webinars. It's not free to be able to use Zoom as a webinar platform, so we do need funds to keep it going. So if you can contribute, please do consider that. And as an added incentive, Peter and Irene Ginn have again donated some copies of The Ultimate Companion for Birding in Southern Africa for us to use to raise funds for conservation conversations. So we have 3 copies up for grabs. So if you donate at least 200 Rand, you'll go into the draw for one of these books. And so each multiple of 200 Rand gets you another entry. So please do consider donating. These books are amazing and a really good resource for any birder in Southern Africa. And we will do the draw at the last webinar of the year, so that's in 2 weeks' time. So get donating quickly. If you donate up to maybe 5 o'clock on the 28th of November, you will still be considered for the draw. You can scan the QR code, or you can go to the BirdLife South Africa website, and I'll post the link in the chat box shortly. Now on to tonight's webinar. I'm very excited to be joined by my colleague Cassie Carstens. He will be telling us about the amazing Secretarybirds. So Cassie holds a BA and BA Honours in Heritage and Cultural Tourism. And he has a BA in Environmental Management and a BSc Honours in Geography. You like racking up those degrees there. He's currently pursuing an MSc in Zoology, focusing on the conservation ecology of endangered bird species. And he has 12 years of professional experience working on birds such as the southern ground hornbill, Cape parrot, and now the Secretarybird. His expertise includes GIS-based spatial analysis, acoustic monitoring and interpretation, and applied field ecology. He has co-authored 12 peer-reviewed articles in international scientific journals and is an experienced field technician and a qualified bird guide. So Cassie, we are very much looking forward to your presentation and hearing what you've been getting up to with the Secretarybirds. So yeah, you're welcome to start sharing and start your talk.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Christina, for the very flattering introduction. Truly appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining a talk on the icon of the African grasslands, the stomper of snakes, the karate chicken itself, Secretarybirds, possibly the most amazing bird on our continent. Thank you to Christina for hosting, and of course, all my other colleagues who keep these conservation conversations running on a bi-weekly basis, Jessica, John, and Kurt. So awesome to you guys for keeping it going, and for each and every one tuning in every couple of weeks. We truly appreciate it from all the BirdLife staff. We cannot even begin to express our thanks. Tonight, I will take you on a bit of a scientific journey looking at the intricacies, the hidden world of these awesome birds. We will be very, very academic. So if you haven't put your thinking cap on tonight, after dinner or before dinner, do so now. I'll give you a couple of moments. We'll be focusing on the long-term tracking study that we've been conducting now for more than a decade. So yeah, be ready. We will start with something absolutely awesome in a great part of the world, India. That is where we're going. So you might have seen this one posted on your chat groups recently. It did the rounds. I received a few posts about it. This article was published 2 days ago in the Times of India. It is a reference to an article, new research about the study on Secretarybird kicking strength and how they go about it. So a bit of their physiology and how they go about stomping snakes to death, which is the thing that we admire most about them. But the study is based on this video. If you have seen some of my previous talks, you might have seen this little video. And that is the study referenced underneath. And you might note that that's not a new study. That is 9 years old. But we're not going to moan about that. What's 9 years between friends? So we'll forgive the Indian journalists for being slightly late with this one. This article published by Portugal, Mern, Sparks, and Daly was in Current Biology a couple of years ago, and this bird was the individual that they looked after. So please meet Madeline. Madeline was a 24-year-old secretary-bird female. She was in captivity under the protection of Hawk Conservancy Trust. And they did this study to figure out how these secretary birds go about kicking things to death. So what they did, they trained her to kick a plastic snake on a pressure plate covered with a bit of fake grass, and then measured the impacts and with high-speed cameras recorded her body movements. So she was at that stage, 24 years old, 3.96 kilograms in weight, which is about average for an adult secretary bird, and just almost 70 centimeters at the hip. Let's pause quickly. Immediately you can think, wow, 24-year-old. That's quite an old bird. So yes, the longest or the oldest bird in captivity that we know of is in Europe, and it's more than 40. So long-lived bird with all the wonderful implications that come from that. So this study had the following couple of interesting things that they found. Whilst this bird kicked, it managed to increase its body weight by 5.1 on average. So 5.1 times. So that number in Newton below it, 195 Newton, is of course now multiplied with the bit of gravity that comes in, is the amount of energy that this bird or weight that this bird can put out whilst kicking. Now that's equivalent to moderate walking or even sprinting at times for most other species. It was comparable with the maximum jump strength of one of the studies that they referenced, focusing on guinea fowl, helmeted guinea fowl, which as they jump maximum height was 5.3 times their body weight. And interestingly enough, it is well below the impact strike strength of a barn owl, which as it flies and then pounces down on a rodent or something small else squeaky and edible, multiplies its body weight by 14 and a half. So yeah, quite amazing to think that a bird as small as a barn owl can increase its body weight by that amount. But of course, the bird is flying whilst doing that. So secretary bird kicking from a standing stationary position, I think should take the top prize in any case, in my opinion. The most interesting thing, however, was the speed at which this bird kicked. Now, I do not know exactly how they measured it or from which specific point they recorded the kick, whether it's from the bird lifting its foot off the ground or whether it's from the apogee of the kick as it's about to go down. I think it was that, in fact. And that was measured at 15 milliseconds. Now, I did some ad hoc research prior to this presentation and recorded myself saying the word secretary bird. And that took me 1.283 seconds to say. So, secretary bird. That's 1,283 milliseconds. That bird can kick 85 and a half times whilst I say the word secretary bird. Quite amazing to think, huh? So yeah, amazing study. If you haven't read it, go have a look. Just type in Times of India secretary bird into your search engine of choice and go and read the article. They've got the link to it. Or you can just look for Current Biology secretary bird. And yeah, if you've memorized the reference earlier, then I'm sure you'll be on it. But let's move on to the meat and potatoes of tonight. In 2011, when the Secretary Bird project was founded by BirdLife South Africa, one of the first long-term projects was to find out how these birds move across and utilize the habitat in South Africa in a very fragmented landscape. And this study has been absolutely eye-opening into the species biology and behavior. It was conducted in 3 phases. They started, 2012 was the first deployment, until 2017 with 10 units put out. And phase 2, a couple of years later. And then phase 3 is currently under my control. I deployed my first 2 trackers earlier this year. We're not going to focus a lot on phase 3. We're going to focus on the first 2 a little bit more. So yeah, we can ignore that one for now. So those 2, if you do the quick sums, that is quite a large amount of data over a very long time frame that we've been studying these birds. But let's go back to that very, very first deployment The 10 birds we tracked for a combined 4,500 days, and they recorded amongst them 45,000 data points. Now, that's a geospatial point with a longitude, a latitude, and then an altitude provided by a small GPS unit that was attached to the bird with a little backpack. We'll talk about that in a little while. The record holder for the longest carried GPS unit was a bird called Taimane with 1,716 days. So he hasn't been beaten yet, although there are a few contenders, which we will hopefully chat about in a little while. This first part of the study led to the publication of a journal article describing the movement dynamics of juvenile secretary birds and how they disperse across the landscape. It was published by the stalwarts in BirdLife, our head of conservation, who will be talking to you in 2 weeks' time, Dr. Annelien Smit-Robinson, Adam Stratif, who's our landscape program manager. I hope I've got that right. My brain suddenly clutched out. And then former presenter and host here on the Conservation Conversation, Dr. Melissa Whitecross. Now, this study found that a young secretary bird, once it fledges, leaves the nest, it moves about 1.6 kilometers around the nest for a period of between 2 to 6 months. And that was the first concrete bit of conservation action that we could implement flowing from this study. We could advise developers in either the wind energy industry or the solar energy, or even in mining, if that's the case, that should there be a secretary bird nest on their development, that a buffer zone of 1.6 kilometers should please be placed and excluded from the development. So immediately we could actively work on conserving this amazing species. Let's move on to the record holder, Taimane. So he was fitted with his GPS just outside of Warden in the Free State. I am a stone's throw from there. I'm coming to you from Bethlehem. Yes, the States is wonderful this time of year. Lots of thunderstorms. It rained for the past couple of days. It is soaked out there. And once he moved away, once Taimane fledged, he traveled a little bit and went to KZN and turned around on the Amanzimtoti beach right there. The GPS point was recorded on the beach. We couldn't believe it. Amazing that the bird would fly that far. That is that juvenile dispersal that takes place. Another individual ringed in Gauteng and fitted with a GPS, traveled all the way to the Makgadikgadi Pans in Botswana before turning around. And that turning around thing is quite an interesting bit of behavior, because Taimane, when he turned around, spent a little bit of time in the KZN Midlands, must have loved Nottingham Road, must have loved Mooi River, spent a bit of time around Harry Smith briefly, and then moved up to Meermul, where he had his own nest after a couple of years of moving around the landscape. So that shows you the lifetime, or at least the adult, from juvenile to adult journey of one of these secretary birds. So that's how it looks when we string a lot of interesting data together. We can create awesome little images and maps like that. So that's it's one of my favorite parts of the work, if I can be absolutely honest. So the second phase of it is going to make up the bulk of it, but let's just quickly pause and go back to the third phase. It's currently what I'm running, and that's what we've been founding recently. We've got a lot of data from the first and second phase on juvenile movement. So once the bird is out of the nest, how it moves around the nest area and then disperses and come back. This young individual is named Aragon. I fitted him with the GPS tracker on the 11th of January this year in the southern parts of the Free State. If you know where Jagersfontein is, it was close to that. So Aragon has been carrying his GPS now for 200, almost 300 days. And despite being a little scrawny tyke, we think there wasn't a lot of food during the last few months of his development, or last few weeks. He has really proven himself to be like an endurance athlete. That is his lifetime movement up to the end of last month. So his natal nest, you can see there in the bottom left or bottom right-hand side of that little map. He dispersed after a couple of months and traveled all the way up with a very circuitous route to Dealsville, which is to the west of Bloemfontein. Spent a lot of time there. You can see that turnaround area where he explored quite a lot, but then decided to come home on a parallel route a little bit removed, of course, and then eventually settled himself close to home, not exactly on the home property, but close to the Kalkfontein Dam Nature Reserve. That is where he is currently moving. So that shows you the juvenile movement patterns over a couple of months, the first few months of a bird's true independent behavior. So that's a lot of the data that we already have. This is just an awesome recent example. So Aragon is still out there. The GPS is still ticking, giving me a GPS location every couple of hours. So yeah, I am watching keenly to see what he does as he moves and gets a little bit older. But phase two, this is now the important part of it. So that phase comprised 12 birds that we put GPS trackers on, and unfortunately only 7 of them provided us with usable data. So combined 7,200 odd days that they carried it. And yes, you can now see the massive, massive amount of new data that has come in during that phase compared to the 43,000 that we got during the first. We are now almost 700,000 GPS points. The record holders currently, Bob is slightly behind Niku, who's been carrying his GPS now for 1,415 days. They are both still out there. The GPSs are both ticking and both have bred this year. We'll talk about that. That's the teaser to come. That's the highlight for me. But before we move on to the deep dive in the data, we need to talk about these little GPS units that we put on the birds. So they are there's a multitude of different manufacturers. There's a multitude of different sizes, shapes, and yeah, the ones that I put on with this one is another bird that I fitted with the GPS earlier this year. It was a recent player in the field called Druid Technology. Now, on average, these GPS units weigh about 15 to 20 grams. The cutoff point for most bird GPS tracking is that the unit's weight should not be more than 3% of the bird's body weight. Now, that falls well within that range, of course, with the bird being 4 kilograms, 15 grams, not a lot. We fit it to the bird with a little Teflon strapped backpack around the wings so that the backpack sits low on the back. And yeah, don't worry, I stitch in a weak point. So imagine the straps of the backpack is comprised of 4 different strands that meet in the front, and I stitch it very badly on purpose because that is where it frays, eventually loosens, and then will fall off as time goes by. So the bird isn't stuck with this GPS for life. That thing will eventually fall off because I hope that my stitching is as poor as I do it in that moment. All these units are powered with small little solar panels that feeds a little battery. The average battery size is about 30 milliamp hours and depends on how many GPS points you ask it to record per day is how long this little thing will last. So it can store about 100 without recharging, and the accuracy of it is, as with most GPSs, if you've used one yourself in the field, there's a bit of a sway, a bit of a discrepancy, not between 4 and 5 meters. Let's be overly generous, 10 meters. And I can program it to record on an hourly interval, on a half-hourly interval, or if I really want a lot of data, which is what I've been wanting recently, I can have it record every minute and send me the GPSs on a set schedule or the GPS locations, which I then download in a massive Excel sheet, and then I go play around and do some awesome things with it. The awesome things are, wow, flying was the first one that we were incredibly interested in. Right. So I assume that the immediate question from you would be, how high do they fly? And yes, that is the first point. Very high. If you now look at a secretary bird and you look at its body physiology, it's not a classic bird of prey that swoops down on an unsuspecting dove flying past. No, it doesn't hawk from a perch. It doesn't hover like a kite. No, it likes to walk. Its flights are mainly short little hops, short little jumps, but it does soar like a crane or a stork, or sometimes even like a vulture. So the highest point I've recorded for one of these birds was more than 8,000 meters above sea level. How did I do that? Well, the GPS provides me with that altitude reading along with the latitude and longitude. I then reference that with the digital elevation model. So that's the true height above sea level for that specific point where it should be. And then, of course, you just do a bit of basic math and then you come with the number. Sometimes there are discrepancies. We did talk about them. There were cases where the birds flew 200 meters under the ground. Those I kind of just ignore, and I don't really think we would be able to handle secretary birds that burrow to catch prey. That'll completely rewrite science. So yeah, those are effectively ignored. But some interesting things came out. So this was the one graph that I created that divided into adults, subadults, and juvenile birds. So that's their average flight heights for a selection of points for those 7 birds from the second phase. So I selected all the points during the diurnal hours for each one of the days that the units recorded, and then grouped them all to see where they fell. So that graph is according to a logarithmic scale for those of you of the mathematical or scientific bent. Otherwise, the graph looked horrible. So this makes it look a little bit nicer. Interesting. Juveniles fly lower than adults, and subadults fly higher than adults. So adults were in the middle, as if they've done their time. And it kind of makes sense, right? Juveniles are still very inexperienced. Their dispersal, despite being over long distances, might not be at great height, despite them reaching it. You can see in the graph, the juveniles are on the far right-hand side. They do go high, but most of their flights are lower than the subadults. They are the true ones that are dispersing, looking for a home, trying to find a suitable area where they can settle down. The birds fly higher in winter, which was very interesting. You would think that during the summer months with thermal uplift, it would be a bit of a bigger chance of them flying high during that season, but no, winter was the highest amongst all the seasons for all the birds. And then the real interesting thing was that over their prime habitats, so grassland and savanna, they don't fly very high. They fly lower in Karoo, which was another interesting thing. So the other interesting thing was how they reacted with regards to their flight height over human infrastructure. So over human habitation and buildings, our roads, our residential areas, our industrial areas, they increased their average flight height by more than 700 meters, which was interesting. And over permanent crops, which in the Free State is everywhere, they flew 500 meters higher on average than they do over the other different landscapes. So that was a land cover layer that I used to determine that. So you choose the habitat and you choose the landscape, and then you just play with the data a little bit. The other interesting thing was how high they fly most of the time. Now, you would have seen from that graph that most of their flights take place below 100 meters. I'll show that graph again now, but this was the one that I was interested in. So if you look there on the y-axis on the left-hand side is the average heights, and you'll see that the fat part of that violin is below 100 meters. So that's where most of their flights take place. That led to this little graph. And why did I shade that area? Why am I interested in the birds flying between 0 and 200 meters above the ground, which is on the x-axis on the bottom of the graph? It's because of this. Wind farms. So you might know that South Africa has currently got a massive increase in the number of wind energy sites that are being developed, and they are everywhere. And secretary birds flying below 100 meters most of the time are at exceptional risk of collision with those turbines. Now, if you go back to that little graph of mine, that's now taking the percentage of flights that take place at a certain height. So the percentage number is on the y-axis on the left-hand side, the left-hand axis. And you'll note that 25% of their flights take place below 19 meters, which is kind of what you would expect. They walk a lot. There might be a fence in the way, so it's a quick little jump and a hop to get over the fence. Or they've emptied out this little field. They just want to get around this little hill to go and forage on the far side. It's a short little flight. It's not big. It's not massive. Most turbines are in height in that shaded area. So 30 meters above the ground is the lowest point that most turbine blades turn at. And they go up to just over 200 meters. Some of them do differ, the sizes and the shapes, but 50% of secretary bird flight take place below 32 meters. So half of their flights, if you just take that 0 to 300-meter range, take place within the danger zone. So our work to advise the wind industry on certain mitigation measures, that's now our blade patterning, that's shutdown on demand that my colleague Sam Ralston's Peyton works on. They are critical to ensure the safety of not just secretary birds, but so many others, because a lot of the birds' flight take place within this specific flight range. So this is something that we can really take forward to advise improved mitigation measures within the wind industry. So this is something that I'm very excited about. We plan on creating a guideline document for the wind industry. We will be collaborating with our Birds and Renewable Energy Forum over the next couple of months to create this document to ensure that secretary birds, which is a tricky species when it comes to wind farms, they move their nests, which is the difficult thing to deal with, so that despite the difficulty, they are still taken care of on our landscape. Right, so flying, we've now spoken about. Let's get to the habitat part, which in the parlance of estate agents, if you're watching, location, 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 grassland, grassland, grassland. That's what these birds like most. So if you look at the habitat layers that we've included in my analysis, grassland comes out right at the top. So that's what you would associate them with. If you've driven any long distance road through the Free State or through the Western Cape or in any other part of the country, traveling down to Durban, for instance, if there's a bit of grass, that's where you'll find these birds, and that's where most people do record them. My first most fond memories of the species was seeing them on family trips driving down the N1 heading towards Cape Town, traveling from the north of the country. So I assume that might be yours as well. So with that first phase, the first batch of data, we built the first habitat suitability model. And this is what it looked like. So the yellow shaded areas were considered the most prime property for secretary birds in South Africa. And you can see that there are certain concentrations, most notably the one in the Eastern Free State that border with Mpumalanga, the Mpumalanga Western Highland grasslands, and then down into KZN. So that's where I'm based. That's where most of my field work takes place, where I monitor most of my nests. So this map led directly to my focus area. This is why I am based where I am. But you would now think that was built with 43,000 points more than a decade ago. So, right, has anything changed? Yes, it has. We have updated this model with an absolute massive amount of data that I've spoken to you about. And this is the result. So the updated habitat suitability model. I can't make it look as nice as that first version. I'm still playing with it. My cartography skills will make sure that it looks like that eventually. But this is how I built it. So we took all of that tracking data that we've now recorded for all those years. We thinned them. Unfortunately, we had to, because there was just too many of them, to 1 point for every 25 square kilometers. Then we added in a whole lot of interesting variables, the digital elevation models, the vegetation layer supplied by the South African National Biodiversity Institute, the national land cover layer that we've spoken about. There's a whole range of bioclimatic layers that you can add in. Now that's mean, average, maximum, minimum temperatures, the same for precipitation, for solar radiation, etc., etc. There's 19 of them. So we threw them all into the mix, and then we used as reference layer. So that's to say that this tracking data is now where the birds moved, these habitat layers in which these points were located, or these variables where these points were located. We just had to make sure there's always a reference layer that you use. And for that, we threw in the Southern African Bird Atlas Project references for the species. Now, 2 weeks ago, my colleagues, Dr. David Illerschmith and Dr. Alan Lee, spoke to you about citizen science. And I can only but echo their views and their statements on the importance of citizen science for bird conservation in South Africa. I cannot say it enough. So if you are a person that birdlasses or bindos and uploads your data to the Southern African Bird Atlas Project, if you take part in some of the other citizen science projects, Quack, the coordinated waterfowl counts, and especially the coordinated avifaunal road counts, CAR. We're still high-fiving each other because of that name. That data is critical for us to ensure that we know exactly where birds are, what their densities are, what their distributions are, and that fed straight into this habitat model. So you can immediately see that there were a couple of changes between the two versions of it. So the first one, you might notice a couple of gaps that have been filled, those ones specifically. So during the first iteration of the model, the Kalahari and Kruger was considered to be low suitable, on the low level for this species, which is completely contrary to what we would normally think. If you travel to Kalahari in the summer months, you might see more than 10 secretary birds at a waterhole. There's a lot of them. If you traveled in Kruger, you would see a lot of them. So those areas have now been included, updated based on that citizen science data recorded by people like you that are watching this. So I can only encourage you, if you aren't a keen citizen scientist yet, please do take it up. If you're a member of a bird club, there's most likely someone that are quite experienced with it. If you're not, please reach out to your local bird club, become a member. And yes, your contribution is incredibly valuable. Additionally, the new model, of course, expanded that central area of suitable habitat. So the birds are, yeah, they're now really everywhere. So my home range, my personal field study area has now expanded, but I can only drive so far. So the Eastern Free State remains my home for now. But you can see that places like the Overberg, the Eastern Cape, is also now included, but there's still a big Secretarybird black hole in the Northern Cape. That's just because there's a massive lack of citizen science data in that area. So hopefully somewhere along the line, those holes will be filled, and then we'll run this model again. And yes, we'll see where these birds are most found. So what do we do with this type of habitat suitability model? Like, do I just have this to show you a nice picture and print out a map? No. We send this to provincial agencies that work with environmental planning, their strategic biodiversity protection, and we ask them to include this in their strategies to make sure that this species, based on this map, areas in which they plan to build or which they plan to put in place protected areas, that this species is considered. So that's what we do with this type of a map. So as soon as the final version is done and we've published it, it'll be available to all provincial governments to use in their planning. So yeah, that's what we do with it. We're pretty proud that we can do that on such a wonderful level to ensure the species survival across the country. Right, habitat as well. Let's just quickly do the last thing, which is possibly my favorite. We're sticking with the maps. The GIS cartographer in me is always get the warm and fuzzies when I make maps. This is a lifetime travel map for one of the birds that I've mentioned, Bob. He was fitted with his tracker in December of 2021. And he is currently in the central KwaZulu-Natal area. If you are familiar with the Anglo-Zulu War, then Bob is a compatriot in the love for history. He's moving around the Roxdrift and Isaltwana areas close to Dundee. At the moment, he's started breeding for the first year. And yeah, that's where he was located last at the end of the previous month. So that's his lifetime movement, but I can make it look even nicer. I can show you this one. This is known as a spatiotemporal map. That shows the bird's movement across the landscape based on time or its age since it carried the GPS unit. So the color of the points and the lines that connect them goes from darker, which is right at the start, a long time ago, to lighter in yellow, which is the most recent. So doing a map or creating a map like this, I can show you how this bird has moved across the landscape as it has gotten progressively older, and how in its adult years now, the bird is now about 4 years old, he has chosen that Roxdrift, Isaltwana, KZN battlefields area as its home. And he spent quite a lot of time exploring it. You can see the shadings of green and yellow that are there. And yeah, that's one of my favorite things to create. So this we can use to identify habitats that's important for the birds at a specific age. So we can now say the juvenile birds prefer this type of habitat, and as they progressively get older, they eventually settle in something like this. So combining all of them, we can truly identify habitats in South Africa that require serious protection. And as I've said, grassland, 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 well, that is possibly the most important habitat to protect in South Africa. So we're working actively to ensure that through protected areas and closely engaging with landowners and other stakeholders across the country. The fun part, however, moving on to the main course, is the breeding, which is the funnest part of my field work. So currently we are smack bang in the middle of the breeding season. The birds are prolific. I do not have enough hours in the day to race between nests to monitor and see what's happening. I am run ragged, and it's been an absolutely amazing year. I've had 2 very quiet years where not a lot of breeding took place in this Eastern Free State area, but they have come to the party for sure. So, what can we pull from all of this massive, massive movement data with regards to their breeding behavior, right? The easiest things we can start talking about where they breed. We identified nests either through help from birders or landowners that saw birds standing on their nest sites. They build a bed of sticks and grass on top of a shrub or a small tree. And the thornier, the better. It makes my life quite interesting. I have lost many a shirt and trouser climbing into a secretary-bird nest, I can assure you. Average height is between 2.5 and about 5 meters. So it's just out of reach of your terrestrial predators, but they're still at risk, of course, of avian ones or aerial predators. Crows specifically, we believe to be a little bit of an issue, not just for secretary birds, for vultures as well. For instance, my colleague Justin Henry with his vulture work has recorded crows visiting vulture nests on frequent occasions, which has us a little bit worried. If you see a secretary bird standing on a tree like that, be suspicious, please, and let me know. I would love to go and have a look, especially if they return repeatedly on multiple days, sometimes even for weeks, to the same tree, then things get interesting. So if you have one, please let me know. If you know of someone that knows, please let me know. And if you know of someone that knows of someone that knows of one, please let me know. Right. Birds lay between 1 and 3 eggs, which both incubate, both members of the pair. Yes, he is not a deadbeat dad. He contributes beyond just providing food. And the incubation period is 40 to 45 days. Then the nestlings spend about 10 weeks on average on the nest, and then they climb out and go to a manzamtoti. So that 2 to 6 month period around the nest before their dispersal is a classic behavior that we've now seen repeated with many, many, many of the young birds. But the thing that we're most interested in is the adult movement, because we've now buffered, as you could now have seen, for juvenile movement. That 1.6 kilometer buffer zone was for young birds. How do adults move? Right. And we are finally getting the data. So during the first phase, Taimane, I mentioned, he bred, and sadly, though, the data for him towards the end of his GPS's life was very sparse. So sadly couldn't pull a lot of that. But phase 2 came to my rescue, and there were 3 males that bred. So why no females? Because we are just unlucky. That is why. The few trackers that we did have on female birds ceased to function very early in their lives. And the few that I've put out, that picture earlier of the bird on the nest with me reaching down, there were 2 birds. I selected one, deployed the tracker, was a male. The sibling was a female. So my luck is just horrible with regards to female birds. So that's the last remaining gap in our knowledge, is how do female birds move across the landscape as soon as they reach adulthood. But I could tell you about the males, right? So we've had 4 breeding attempts from those 3 males over the past 3 years. 1 fail. We had 2 successes, which is the wins, so 2 wins, and 1 ongoing as we speak. So Ikapa, Bob, and Niku are my absolute heroes out there. So between the lot of them, I have now gathered 46 months of male adult breeding movement, which has absolutely changed our view on how we need to protect these species. Caveat, as with most of the things that I've spoken about, I should have said this earlier, I'm still working on all of this. So The data is still not as perfect as I would like it, and my analysis methods still need a little bit of polish, but this is just the rough draft. So consider this preliminary. It's not the official stuff yet. Once we publish guidelines and final documents and eventually publish it in journals, then it'll be official. So this will just give you the inside track, the sneak peek to what is happening out there. Right. So this is Ikapa's breeding movement during his first breeding attempt in the early or the middle parts of 2023. So if you now recall from Taimone's little movement map that I showed you earlier, that was his dispersal and eventual return. You might recall that at some of the points, especially around his natal nest and around his eventual own nest, his adult nest, the point just seemed to buzz, like just stay together. And this is what's happening here. So this is on a very small scale around the nest. So the little star is the nest site, and all of his movement took place within that little circle. And that was for several months leading up to the breeding season. Now, I can show that to you in a slightly better way. I can give you a bit of a heat map. That was his first breeding attempt from January in 2023 up to September in 2023. I found the nest to be active in August of 2023 and went back a month later to see whether the chicks have hatched. And sadly, the chicks or the eggs were predated by, I assume, a crow, because I found them just outside the nest, shattered and eaten. So I was a little bit sad. But that concentrated movement pattern I noticed, and that intrigued me because I saw it during his second breeding attempt as well. This one took place a year later. And I found that nest active in October of last year. And you would notice now that I've included a few extra months. So why not just start at October? Because already in January, they were moving according to this very concentrated pattern around a nest. And only November and December were slight outliers. The nest was active at that stage. Aragon, who we spoke about earlier, was on that nest. So Aragon is a second generation tracked bird. So he's an offspring of Ikapa. So I believe at that stage, food resources in the plain that the pair had utilized ran low and they had to forage a little bit further. So as soon as the nestling was out of the nest in February, so we fitted the GPS in January, and as soon as the nestling kind of stood on its own 2 feet, the parents could expand their foraging range while still providing a little bit of care. I noticed the same pattern with Niku. Yes. He was on the Vaal River, so right between the Free State and Gauteng. I had to increase the scale quite a bit. So you'll notice that the maps aren't as clear as the previous two because the scale was, I had to zoom in quite far to get those heat maps. Niku moved much further during his breeding attempt. If you are a member of the Secretarybird chat group on our BirdLife community channel on WhatsApp, you would have seen me posting frequently about most of these birds. So Niku's nest, I sadly found a little bit late. So by the time I managed to go and survey it, the chick had fledged a couple of days earlier. The landowner and I were very, very disappointed when we got to the nest site and found it to be empty. I thought that they didn't breed or the nest was predated. And a day later, he messaged me, sent me a picture with a nestling back on the nest, roosting for the night. So Niku successfully bred. That was his breeding movement. And I'm currently seeing the same thing with Bob. Bob and KZN breeding, a little bit more concentrated, but almost in between. So Ikapa was incredibly close to his nest site on a continual basis, as if he needed to guard it. Niku, much further, had to forage a lot wider. Bob, in between. Why? Why do you think? I am still trying to figure that out. That's my next step. Because after I created these graphs, I've now got a couple of suspicions. Right, so the graphs is distance from nest on the left-hand side and the total movement area in square kilometers on the right-hand side, the distance measured in kilometers. So with the distance on the y-axis on the left and at the bottom, the various nests. So the first two, number 175 and number 224, they were Ikapa. Number 275 is Niku. Number 252 is Bob. And then a combined one where I took all of their data and just threw it all together in the pot. And immediately you can see the massive differences between these three birds. So Ikapa's breeding attempts, the first one a little bit wide, the second one much closer. Niku is like insanely wide. Bob still wide, some outliers within his movement or his total distance from nest. But then the argument can be made that the habitat might have played a role. Niku specifically, because he is on that Vaal River area between Gauteng and the Free State, where the landscape is incredibly fragmented. He has to travel quite far to find foraging areas. Ikapa maybe the plain in the southern Free State where there's only cattle in the surrounding area, just large expanses of cattle grazing paddocks, he might be able to find sufficient food in a very close proximity to the nest. Bob, on the other hand, he's in that case in Midlands where there's beautiful grasslands as well. So he's somewhere in between. Also very developed there. There's a lot of farmers, small communities. So he might also be in the middle trying to find sufficient areas. The average, however, of these birds moving away from a nest, just over 5 kilometers. 1.6 for juveniles, just over 5 for adults. So immediately you can see that, yeah, amazingly, this data will now allow us to upgrade and update that mitigation strategies that we have for the species. The movement area is equally interesting. That's the total distance around the nest. For those of you in the know, you take all the GPS points and then you do something called a kernel density estimation, where you take a certain percentage of all the points to predict the bird's home range, its core range. I just kind of went at the maximum, which was about 90% of all the points around the nest. I still need to do the others. So this is based on about 90% of all their points around a nest for each one of those months. And you can see that the average just over 14 square kilometers. So not their core home range, of course. This might be their total foraging range. During the breeding season, it does contract, as we've now seen with all of them. And as soon as they're done and dusted, like babies out, then they expand their range again to quite large areas. So yeah, this has been absolute amazing data that we've been able to pull out. So still working on it. We will eventually publish on this. And yes, we will be able to ensure that updated protection measures are in place for this iconic species. So that's what the future holds for me. So in the current breeding season, 2 trackers were deployed earlier this year, and I've got 19 active nests, of which a couple have fledged already. And this coming weekend, I will deploy 2 of the 5 trackers that I have available to me for this coming season. So the focus, however, after that, so this will be on 2 young birds. The focus after that will be on adults to add in to absolutely concrete this data that we have for adult movement. So the awesome thing, and Christina, we have about 10 minutes to do it. I'm going to give the person watching, the opportunity to vote for the name of the first bird that we will deploy a tracker on. So Christina will post it's a poll, POLL, in the chat. There you have it. You can vote for the name. There's a male option and there's a female option. So I went classic mythology in both a European, Scandinavic, and African context. I have short descriptions for each one of the names. During our first phase, a lot of the birds were named after mythological individuals, gods and demigods and deities. It was awesome. You've got your option to please choose. And depending on the sex of the bird, once I've sent the blood work in to have done, we will announce which name was chosen, and then we will post it. So please do vote. You will have about 10 minutes whilst I answer a couple of questions. I'm almost done. It's just the last few slides as always. So if you want to reach out, there's my email. Please do go have a look on our website. It's Secretarybird just in the search box, and you'll find everything about us. We do have a little bit of a Facebook thing as well. And yeah, if you want to go see what we do, please contact us. So that email you're welcome to use for any nest information. If you find birds, if you want to help or assist, if you just see birds in your area, please let me know. And then the final thank you standard. This is both historic and current individuals, parties, companies, and trusts that has been involved in Secretarybird research, supporting our work, ensuring that we protect these iconic species. There's a lot of individuals that has contributed in allowing me to walk around on their farms. So the bulk of those names are farmers in the Eastern Free State, Mpumalanga, and the Northern Cape. So thank you very much to each and every one of you for allowing me to tromps around and climb your trees and monitor those amazing birds on your properties, and the few people that has accompanied me in the field. Your work and your assistance has been stellar and so appreciated. And a big thank you to each and every one of you for watching tonight. We really appreciate it. Please continue to do so. Tune in 2 weeks to see the highlights of our conservation division for this year by Dr. Annelien. And yes, Christina, thank you very kindly for hosting. That is all from me.
Thank you so much, Cassie. That was amazing. You're doing such fantastic work.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really love your data analysis of your tracking points. I hope to get there one day with my R and GIS work. So yeah, doing
It is
great
still
work.
Greek to me. It's still Greek to me. Trust me.
Yeah. So I see there's lots of emojis coming through, people who
Thank you,
loved your
everyone.
talk. So yeah, and still some votes coming in. So if you haven't voted on the poll, please do. I can't vote, but my choices aren't doing that well. So
Yeah.
but let's go on to some questions in the last few minutes that we have. So the first one from Rob Simmons. Asking what proportion of the time, i.e. in a day, are your birds in flight? And the reason that he asks is that only 8 fatalities of secretary birds have been recorded in the 2,400 fatalities in Sam Ralston's summary of wind farm deaths.
Yeah, so it's very difficult to say, Rob, because it's just a single point in between. So the analysis to look at subsequent points, I've just done the single analysis. So that still needs to take place to see the proportion of the day that they are in flight. So I haven't done that yet. I hope to do that. That is one of the plans. So yeah, forgive me for not being able to provide you with that immediately. That'll hopefully come down the line. I will message you personally.
Great. Thanks, Cassie. Then there are a couple of questions around the trackers.
Yes.
So CF Tritter asks, what is the cost per tracker?
Oh, you can go either on the cheap range, which is here between 5 and 7,000 rand, or you can go on the expensive range, which is more than 12. It just depends on the type of it. The ones that we use most is a GPS GSM unit. So that just connects to the local cellular networks. And you can get the GPS satellite ones. That's the full fat version. Those are the more expensive ones. The thing you always need to consider is the data hosting. Yes, you kind of buy a subscription as well. So that's on a yearly basis, there's a data hosting fee that you need to pay as well. And that differs depending on the service provider, but it's normally between 1,500 to 2,000 rand a year per unit. So yeah, it also depends on how long the unit lasts. It does impact your budget sometimes. And the frustrating thing with the cost being so high for units, as I mentioned, we put 12 out during the second phase, of which some of them we put out and they never reported in, and they're gone. So yeah, it's sometimes a frustrating part of deploying these trackers in such a way. So yeah, I've had just during the last year, the 2 trackers I put out, the one is still going with Aragon. So after a couple of months now, the second one I put out on Buckbeak in the Northern Cape, the bird is still, as far as we know, still alive, but the GPS died after 3 months, stopped recording. So yeah, went to the last point, scoured it. Multiple people went to look, try and find a carcass, couldn't find it. So we assumed the bird is still alive. And yeah, the GPS just broke, which is very frustrating.
Very frustrating. I've had that happen to me with some penguin trackers, so I know the feeling.
Laugh all the calls for us.
Yeah, unfortunately. So then there's a question from HV asking about the science behind the weight ratio for the trackers and the bird's body weight. Do you
Then,
know?
I must actually, I must paste it here in front of my face so that I recall it every time. There was an article published quite a couple of years ago. I mean, I think it might be Walker, something 1980s or 1970s. As soon as GPSs came into,
Hmm.
the use or popular use within science, this estimate of 3% was given, and it's based on a scientific study. So we all just reference that, and no one has kind of messed with it because since that's the baseline for most of it. So you
Mm.
can paint me blue if I remember the exact article now. So yeah, apologies. I should know that. I should know that off
Mm.
heart.
Yeah, even though it happened, it's from, several years ago now, it still seems to be valid as, you've demonstrated with your birds. They
Yes,
they do fine and they breed and they
do their
yeah,
thing.
survive with these devices on.
Mm. Yeah, so maybe it's pertinent to also point out that we do go through a very stringent ethical clearance
Yes,
process for all of our
absolutely.
studies.
Mm,
So we have to argue our case of why we will if truly inconvenience the bird.
mm,
And the value of the data that we get out is our argument that with the data, with the knowledge, we can improve the conservation efforts and actions for this bird. So that's the angle we always try and take, but we need to really argue our case as effectively and as thoroughly as possible. And in some cases,
absolutely.
yeah, you do lose out. You might not
Mm,
be approved, and then you try and develop a different study, go a different route.
mm,
So, and then same
yeah.
process again. So there is quite stringent methods. BirdLife has got an internal ethical committee made up of various stakeholders, individuals, for instance, from the SPCA. There's some academics, and they look at all of our proposals. You've had to submit one. I've had to submit a couple. Each one
Mhm.
of us
Yeah.
at BirdLife goes through that
Yeah.
process.
And they always ask lots of questions, and it's not
Yes.
a rubber stamp
Yes.
issue at all.
No,
So
it is definitely not.
there's a question from Nikki Wright, wondering whether secretary birds would use artificial nesting platforms in areas where trees have been damaged.
There's one picture that I found in the archive when I started this position of a artificial platform that they wanted to consider, but I don't think that they will love it.
Mhm.
No one has truly tried, so maybe there is argument for a study, but I
Mhm.
think the fact that they like trees, that they like the shrubs, they uh,
Mhm.
might have various ones within a home range is a key that they might not really need artificial supplementation of
Mhm.
nest sites. So yeah, I've got one picture somewhere, and I just always giggle when I look at it.
Mhm. So now there's a question from Jonathan Stacy, asking whether the Lesotho Plateau might hold birds that are under-recorded. So
Mm,
he recorded secretary birds in the Montresource Plateau above the amphitheater in the Heiberg in the 70s, about
yes.
3,000 meters.
Yes. So if you look at all the old studies on secretary bird dispersal, it stated that they do go above 2,000 meters. I've personally seen them in Lesotho, driving from Buthabute all the way up to Mokotlong on one of the big grasslands, very high up. I think we were about 2,500 meters. There was a pair moving around. So they do go high. But I do think as soon as it gets a bit cold, they go back down. So I think that might be the case. The highest I've seen them in South Africa was in the Eastern Cape in the Amatolas, where they were close to 1,900 meters above ground, up on a hill in the Amatolas. So yeah, they can go high should they choose so.
Interesting.
I'll pay
Yeah.
I'll
Big.
pay I'll pay good money to see one of them catch one of those what's it, Schlegel's ice rats. That's
Yeah.
that'll be quite awesome.
So then there's two questions around drones, one from Alison and one from Carrie. Do you use drones for visual nest recordings, or is that too disruptive?
So we have considered it. I have used it, but never with an active nest. So
Hmm.
the drone unfortunately flew into a mountain,
Oh,
and I've never been able to use it on an active nest yet.
okay.
So I have heard of private individuals on private properties and farms and reserves that have done that.
Hmm.
And our recommendation is always try just be as high as possible. So if you're
Mm.
you know that there are limitations with regards to flight height with drones, just with general aviation regulations, if you remain within that, but as high as possible above the nest,
Mm.
The female or the male might flush in any case, but be in and out, don't mess around. So, but no, I don't use them. I've like to do things the old school way with my extendable pole and the GoPro at the front. That works for me. So yeah, the drone is an option. Yes. Hopefully I'll be able to replace the crashed one day.
Yeah, that would be good. Then a question from Janet Bloom, asking, how do you know that they're breeding from your GPS data?
When they shrink down their movement. So that's when
Mm.
I get suspicious. So the
Mm.
first few times that I noticed that, I immediately went to try and go and find, because I've got a concentrated area in which every single point or line that I draw between subsequent points goes back to. So I can identify the rough area or the tree even in some cases where the birds might be returning to. So I know where to go.
Mm.
And yes, as soon as it starts shrinking down, I get suspicious, but don't go immediately. Wait a little bit. Just let them do their thing. It seems that they've got this pre-breeding nest build-up period. Not that whilst they're building the nest, preparing the nest, but I also think it might be some form of a territorial fixing. Because unlike other birds, they don't vocalize to advertise their presence. So how do they
Mm.
do it? How do they say that this is our little patch, and if you come in, we're going to kung fu kick you out of here?
Yeah.
I think it's them just spending a lot of time in close proximity to the nest. That is their territorial behavior. They might also do big soaring flights. That's one of the things that I did look at in the data, but or the flight height data, but I couldn't really pull out anything with regards to that yet. I must still work on that. That soaring flight that they do, if they just thermal above their home range area, that might be a display as well.
Hmm.
So, but the nest movement that shrinks down, focused on a single tree, and then we're in business.
Okay. And then a question from Cheryl. What do they feed the chicks?
Oh, it's quite amazing. It's the classic bird thing. They start very small, so it might just be a
Mm.
small grasshopper or a small beetle at the start if the chicks are still very, very tiny, so a couple of weeks old. And then progressively, the prey items get bigger. So the male or female goes out, they might just catch something. They normally swallow it and then
Mhm.
regurgitate at the nest. They might then pick up and then feed. It's not I think only once or twice in some of the studies were individuals recorded carrying a food item in the beak to a nest to then feed to the nestling. Most of the time swallowed. And some of my colleagues, Wesley Gush specifically, he's done some amazing camera trap work at nests.
Hmm.
And there was Mr. and Mrs. Delivery coming in with crops full, regurgitating rats and snakes. And then the youngsters, as soon as they're about 3 weeks old, they can kind of start feeding themselves. So then
Mhm.
they immediately just grab what's been dropped and swallow it like savages. It's quite amazing to see. So
Oh.
the provisioning, of course, gets bigger. So fewer food items need to be provided as the chicks get older because the
Mm.
items just get larger and larger. So the life does get easier, I assume, for the parents.
Mm.
Hopefully, I think
Although maybe it's harder to catch the larger prey. But yeah.
maybe. But yeah, most of their diet is comprised of insects,
Mhm.
and rodents make up the second biggest component. And
Mhm.
despite the awesomeness of them stomping on snakes, it's a very small proportion. So
Okay.
reptile is not very
That's
big.
disappointing.
It is, isn't it? Like you would kind of expect them to like kick buff at us all day long.
Mm. Yeah.
So, they do feed on small mammals as well,
Mhm.
up to a hair size. And then eggs, if there's a land nest or a ground nesting bird, they'll swallow the eggs whole and go and regurgitate eggs into the
Oh,
nest
wow.
that the nestlings will then consume.
Huh.
So rather awesome like repertoire. No, that's a smorgasbord. That's the right word of food items that
Yes.
they provide.
Yes. I'm just going to pause in answering questions just so we can look at the poll because I know I've
Oh, here we
noticed
go.
some people are leaving, so they might want to kind of see the results of the poll. Can you see the results, Cassie? Or
Where do I need to look?
there should be a little pop-up. Yeah, so if anyone hasn't voted yet, please do vote. It should still be on your screen somehow. I haven't used polls very often, so I'm not entirely sure how they work. But if I think if I click end poll, um,
Yes, maybe do
you
that.
should be able to see. I'm just going to take a screenshot quickly in case.
Yeah, because it says here I cannot do
It
anything. I cannot
disappears.
vote.
Okay. Okay, let's end the poll and share results. Can you
Oh,
see
yes, I was
the
hoping.
results? There we
I was
go.
hoping right. For those of you who can't see it, the ladies first, the choices are classic Egyptian. It will be Isis if the bird is a female. And if it's a male, we're going Scandinavian Norse. It will be the god of Wednesday, Odin,
Hmm.
the old one-eyed. So thank you to everyone who voted. As soon as I have the blood work results, I will officially christen the bird and we will announce it on our platform. So thank you very much for voting. Really appreciate your contribution.
Yeah, great. Thanks, everyone. I wish my choice had won, but oh well. Scotty for the just seems apt. Anyway, let's there's still a few more questions. So maybe let's try and answer a couple more, and then I'll let everyone go. A question from Helen Fleming, asking about the blood work that you do. Do you sedate the birds?
No. No, so it's quite a process, Helen, to go through. I have to be mentored by a veterinarian, and then I apply with the South African Veterinary Council to be certified as a para-veterinarian to perform certain uh, procedures in the field. So it's quite a long training process and then a long registration process. I have to argue my case, provide all my ethical clearances that we've briefly spoken about earlier. And then it's just a quick drawing blood. Like as you're going to the doctor to get a small veil of blood, I normally just target the bird's what's it called? Now I'm trying to think. It's the wing vein. So you just open the wing and clean it. What's it now? Sanitize it. There we go. And then I just draw less than a milliliter of blood because I just wet the tip of a small little piece of paper. It's called FDA paper, which I then put in a small tube, and that is all I need. So I need a very, very small amount to determine the sex of the bird. But the process to get to that position is quite stringent. And in the field, you're carrying a small little bag filled with syringes, filled with alcohol wipes, filled with plastic gloves. So yeah, that's standard field kit now. So yeah, that's how we do it.
Great, thanks for that. Yeah, they don't let anyone just go
No,
and stick needles into birds, so
no.
it's very important to be trained correctly. Okay, I think we'll just answer one last question, and then maybe Cassie, if you don't mind answering the last few that we didn't get to on email,
Perfectly, we'll do
I'll
so.
send them to you tomorrow.
Thank you.
So this question from Gustav about the felt condition and land management practices, like correct fire use, grazing management, etc. Does that affect their habitat use in grassland and savanna areas?
We do think that it does, yes, because the felt condition determines the prey availability. The prey availability determines the health of the secretary birds. So we do have a few recommendations with regards to bird-friendly burning and grazing regimes. You might find it on our website. We do have a few documents. I'm just working on a shorter version that I can give you as an A5. But to try and condense a very large amount of data and information and recommendations into a single pamphlet is quite audacious of me. So there are normal recommendations with regards to burning. Don't try and burn everything. With regards to secretary birds specifically, don't burn around the nest, for instance, during breeding. With regards to grazing, don't overgraze because that removes the hidden or the hiding places for prey items, might reduce them. So rotational grazing might be a good idea going forward if you aren't doing it yet. There's a few more that we recommend, but most of those documents are available on our website. If you go look at the resources, we do have a few available. So yes, go have a look.
Great. Yeah. Thanks very much for that,
You're
Cassie.
welcome. You're welcome.
And I think we're going to leave it there for this evening. Um, thank you so much for your presentation and your
You're welcome.
enthusiasm and your care for these birds. It's great to see the work that you've been doing and carrying on. Yeah, so yeah, thanks to Cassie and thank you to all our audience. And everyone seems to have loved it. So yeah, thank you very much for contributing to Conservation Conversations. And just a reminder that we will be back in 2 weeks' time with our last webinar for the year. And that will be our Head of Conservation, Dr. Hanneline Smith-Robinson. So please do join us for that. She'll recap all our conservation highlights from BirdLife South Africa for the year. So with that, thanks very much again, and good night, everyone.